I'm Matthew Keller, chair of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh Aging and Human Needs Commission. I'm also a board member of the Jewish Federations of North America, where I serve as co-chair of the Disability Committee. Tonight's event is held in celebration of Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, and is co-hosted by the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, Jewish Residential Services, and Respectability. The mission of Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh is to cultivate resources, connect people, and collaborate across the community to live and fulfill Jewish values. Jewish Residential Services supports individuals with psychiatric, developmental, or intellectual disabilities, helping them to live, learn, work, and socialize as valued members of the community in Pittsburgh. Respectability is a national organization that fights stigmas and advances opportunities so people with disabilities can fully participate in all aspects of the community. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life, including employment, was established over 30 years ago. However, many people with disabilities still face barriers to obtaining and keeping competitive employment. Tonight, we are going to explore why inclusion of people with disabilities in the workforce is good for the community and good for business. We have a few slides to help illustrate these points and how they're related. Disability is an important component of diversity, and diversity helps organizations succeed. People with disabilities face much higher rates of unemployment and underemployment. In Pennsylvania, there's a 41 percentage point gap between the employment of people with disabilities and people without disabilities. A recent study of 140 companies found that organizations that championed inclusion vastly outperformed their peers, achieving higher profits and lower staff turnover. Equally important, Jewish values encompass all types of inclusion, including disability inclusion. We are fortunate to be able to listen to a conversation between two outstanding inclusion advocates, Jeremy Shapira, Chief Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Officer at Giant Eagle, and Lee Chernotsky, Chief Encouragement Officer at Rosie's Foundation. Their conversation will be monitored by Becky Johnson. Becky is the director of the Jewish Family and Community Services Career Development Center here in Pittsburgh. Becky and her team encourage and individually support job seekers to reach their career goals. Becky is a nonprofit and public service professional with 12 years of experience in refugee and immigrant services, financial empowerment, and program development. We're so glad she agreed to be our moderator tonight. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone will be muted during this event. We will have a question and answer session moderated by Becky, and we'll collect your questions throughout the event. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're recording this event and we'll send out the recording to you after. It is now my great honor to welcome Rabbi Danny Schiff, Foundation Scholar at the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, to kick us off with a Devar Torah.
Good afternoon. I'm really pleased to be able to present this Devar Torah in honor of Jewish Disabilities Awareness and Inclusion Month. It's a really important time of the year because inclusion is a significant value for all of us. And people often ask the question, it might be a significant value for all of us, but is there in fact some textual basis for us to view inclusion as being a foundational Jewish idea? So one of the amazing things about Jewish life is that nothing is ever by chance. And it just so happens that this week's Torah portion, Pekudei, the very last chapters of the book of Exodus, contain within them one of the most significant ideas that really demonstrates that inclusion was something that our ancestors cherished. What do we find right there in this week's Torah portion? What we find is the instruction that everybody is to bring to the tabernacle, the Mishkan that they were building in the desert. Everybody is to bring a contribution of a half a shekel. It's the half shekel tax, that small silver piece of a half shekel value everybody was required to bring. And when I say everybody, that included people of all different abilities. Because as we know, the Torah certainly recognizes that there were people in the Israelite community of diverse abilities. And yet every single person was required to bring that half shekel. First to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, and later on to the temple in Jerusalem. It's why last Shabbat was called Shabbat Shekalim, in memory, in honor of that particular practice. And what's so important when it comes to inclusion about the half shekel tax? It's not just the idea that every single person had to bring the same half shekel, that every person's contribution was going to be equally valued. There's another insight, which is specific to Pekudei, to this week's Torah portion. The half shekel was mentioned earlier in the Torah already, but specific to this week's Torah portion is the following notion. They asked for the half shekel of silver in order to create, Pekudei tells us, the sockets of silver, the covering of the sockets that would be part of the construction of the tabernacle. And there's a commentator from the 1200s called Chizkuni. And Chizkuni tells us that the amount of silver that the Israelites brought was exactly the required quantity in order to cover the sockets precisely. They didn't bring more than was needed, and they didn't bring less than was needed. Every single person's contribution combined added up to exactly what was going to be required to cover those sockets. And what does that imply? That implies that if one person's contribution had been missing, you would have seen a hole in the silver. Something would not have been right. Something would not have been complete. Every person's half shekel was required in order for the silver covering of the sockets to be absolutely whole and complete. It's a very powerful message. What it teaches us is that every person's contribution mattered deeply. Without it, there would have been something visibly, noticeably missing that the community would have lacked. Today, as we mark the importance of inclusion of every person of diverse ability in the workplace, it's also worth recalling what Jews did at the tabernacle and later at the temple. What we did there, our tradition calls avodah. And avodah can be translated as worship, but it can also be translated as work. The place at which the Jewish people came together. The place at which the Jewish people united for one common holy task. That was the place where everybody had to be included equally. That was the place where if somebody's contribution was missing, everybody would have realized that the community was diminished. That covering of silver, that covering of the sockets, said to the Jewish people, there is beauty and completeness when everybody is included in the work. It's a message from this week's Torah portion that continues to ring loudly and proudly in our own day. Amen.
Good evening. I'm Becky Johnson, Career Development Center Director at JFCS. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers this evening, Jeremy Shapira and Lee Chernotsky. Jeremy Shapira leads Giant Eagle's overall inclusion, equity, and diversity strategy, as well as its commitment to stand up against racism. Jeremy is very proud of Giant Eagle's 40-year history of employing people who are differently abled, and is thankful to have the opportunity to participate in such meaningful work. Jeremy serves on the boards of Achieva, Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, and the Squirrel Hill Health Center. Lee Chernotsky is the founder and CEO, Chief Encouragement Officer of Rosie's Foundation, a 501c3 organization in Culver City, California, that generates opportunities for people with diverse abilities to engage and to work. He has been a leader in disability advocacy and education for over 20 years. Lee currently serves on the advisory board of Respectability Los Angeles and the board of the Culver City Arts Business Improvement District. We're now going to dive into our discussion. So Jeremy and Lee, I'm so excited to have you both with us tonight. And I think to get things started, I'd love to hear from both of you how you and your organization or business got started in inclusion work.
Lee?
Oh, well, thank you. Necessity, and because it's the right thing to do, and because creating a culture of access is very important. I think the organization is named after my grandmother, my Bubba Rose, who survived the atrocities of the Holocaust, and I try to honor her survival every day by creating an environment with a culture of access and respect for everybody so that everyone can thrive. And it's a dream come true being in a place where digesting humble pie starts at the top and with a founder and goes with everybody. And so the goal for all of us is to create a Camelot of sorts in terms of here at Rosie's. Getting started with inclusion work goes all the way back to being a child, being diagnosed with a disability myself, and then having to figure out kind of navigating being in the same job in a different place for a really long time until I figured out what the right next step was, which not everyone is blessed with opportunities to do that. And my goal with Rosie's in creating that organization with the incredible support of a visionary philanthropist, Jeff Sobrato, to get it going was really, hey, how do we take this next step? How do we really create that culture of access by making startup culture more accessible? And so starting with flipping a short school bus into an ice cream truck, we then, you figure out what that next step is. What the narrative used to be in terms of being stuck on something, owning the narrative of now we drive this and where are we all going together, was really important. So Jeremy, please.
Lee, thank you. And first of all, thank you everyone for this great opportunity. I'm really happy to be here. I'll sort of answer in two different ways. So at Giant Eagle, as Becky mentioned during my intro, we started this work about 40 years ago. And there's sort of this interesting tale of exactly what happened. So my dad at the time was the CEO of the company. And the director of HR walked into his office one day and said, I think we should start hiring people. At the time, we said people with disabilities. And my dad's first response was no. This was of course many decades ago, and there really weren't any companies out there doing this kind of work, or at least companies like Giant Eagle yet. And the HR person left the room and was disappointed, et cetera. And then a few months later came back and said, I really think we need to start doing this. And I think my dad sort of lost his resolve. And he said, fine, give it a try. And so they started hiring some new people with disabilities, and the positive customer comments started flowing in. And I think the reason why that story is so important is because what happened with my dad was he sort of succumbed to all of the various typical negative biases that exist around people with disabilities in the workplace. And it took the HR director's sort of strength and resolve to make it happen. And once my dad started seeing the positive benefits, then I think that opened the floodgates. My personal story is not entirely dissimilar. So I've been at the company now for 15 years. About almost 10 years ago, in 2013, I was leading the talent acquisition team at the time, and I had just stepped into the role. I had 15 big things I wanted to accomplish, and the United Way of Southwestern PA approached us about partnering in a program called 21 Enable. And my first response was no. This is not at the top of my list. There's lots of other things I want to accomplish first, but eventually I said yes, of course. And I was sort of skeptical for a little bit, and then the inclusion liaison, which I'll talk a little bit about later, took me to meet the first hire that we made as part of the program. Worked in the prepared foods department in one of our stores, and I suddenly realized how powerful this is, what it means for this person that we've hired them, what it means for their family, and of course, what it means for the community. And that is what started my own personal journey. And now I just think, as everyone has been talking about, it's such important work, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because I realize how good it is for our business.
Thank you both. I couldn't agree more. On that note, I wondered if you might be able, either of you, Lee or Jeremy, to elaborate a little bit more. I heard you touch on, yes, this is good for business. Yes, this has impact. Could you elaborate a little bit more on some of the ripple effects you saw within the communities or for those individuals and their families, and really what it meant for the bottom line of the business and why it was good? Could you kind of share out a little bit more detail for how that really played out over time within each of your organizations and businesses?
Jumping off from what you just shared, Jeremy, I'd love to hear a little bit more and then jump in if that's okay. Just it's a perfect segue for you, please.
So, we don't, the concept of measuring the business case, that's not something we really do, but it is obvious to me that people, and I should talk a little bit about why we say people who are differently abled as opposed to people with disabilities, but why people who are differently abled bring so much to the business. First of all, I just start with the assumption that everyone is a productive member of the team. Obviously, especially in this hiring environment, it is really hard to find good people who are good members of the team, who provide great service to our customers, and then, of course, who are willing to stay for the long haul. People who are differently abled obviously stay for the long haul. They continue to be great members of the team. And frankly, as I mentioned a minute ago, our customers love the fact that we do this. And so at the end of the day, our business is about building customer loyalty, and they love what we do. So again, we don't really measure that, but it just goes back to what happened with my dad. We get positive comments all of the time, and that's all that we need to know to prove that this is a success.
I love hearing that, because that just demonstrates how important the qualitative data really is. I think we oftentimes, for so many of the so either helping sectors or that are traditionally seen as that, it's like, well, how many people did you get through? People are not numbers. People are people. People are not diagnoses. People are people. And people have differing abilities, people have diverse sets of ability, and there are people who, living with a disability, having the opportunities and access to diversify their skill set is very important. So experiences like working at Giant Eagle, game changers for people, like the ripple effects that you see in a community. It's so beautiful. And I can't wait to be hopefully doing one of these panels later down when we've had a little bit more history under our belts, to be able to say, hey, like our colleagues at Giant Eagle, we were able to accomplish something like that. Because the idea of creating environments where there's access to continuing education, so both for every employee, for every employer, ongoing, having that ability, that also demonstrates the business case for hiring people who untraditionally would have been able to connect with those opportunities. But also it raises the profile of, whatever the acronym is used for DEI or EDI or wherever, and there's people who add different ones, but at the end of the day, it's access, right? We're all talking about access to the opportunities that we all need. And that's what's going to, and this conversations like this are beautiful. And it's the work that all of the people who are listening here and joining us are going to take back to their businesses, recognizing, and I don't want to misquote this, because I have something called Dyscalculia that makes numbers look like Mandarin Chinese, and I'm from Jersey. I hope that sits well with everybody out there in Pittsburgh. But the idea of really saying there's like a $1.4 trillion annual spending power for the disability community. So if a business has accessibility as a value, why wouldn't everybody be supporting that? Because that just makes the product, like, let's really start thinking about that. And those opportunities to put the designers in place that need to be there. The ripple effects that we see are not always the breadth of the impact, but it's the depth of the impact, both in those local communities. It's because there's a very different conversation. Having had my first experience really working professionally in the disability community was at Camp Ramah, which is just an incredible place where inclusion is not a thing, because it just is. And that's what the I is, just is. And that's a beautiful thing. And a huge shout out to the TICFA program at Camp Ramah in California and everybody there. And one of the most beautiful things is one of those people who is a camper in the tent that I was a counselor that first summer is currently working here as like my colleague at Rosie's. And that to me is what real access is all about. And so I think being able to share those stories that are about collegial interactions, that's where the real change comes and really raises the profile for opportunities.
Thank you so much for sharing. Lee, what you were talking about really plays into what my next question was going to be, which was hearing from both of you what a truly inclusive workplace looks like. What does that mean for your organization, for your business? But also we're going to get a little more specific too.
Please.
So, okay, yeah, I'll go. So we define inclusion in 3 ways. First is just generally, not specific to disability inclusion, but in general. So first Do you feel like you can be yourself at work? Do you feel connected to your team? And do you feel like your unique perspectives are valued? I think that is critical to this discussion. And on a practical level, we're what I'm going to sort of talk about this as a good thing and also an opportunity for us. We are really good at helping people in the door. We are really good at helping people be successful in the roles that they first enter into in the company. When I think about what inclusion truly looks like is when we can start to help people develop further skills, not only in the role that they were brought into, but potentially moving into other roles in the company. And ultimately, I'd like to see people move up into management levels of the company. And so, when you think about how that relates to our definition of inclusion, all three of those elements are critical. First of all, people have to be able to feel like they are proud of themselves, that they can leverage their unique abilities, and obviously feel like the team appreciates them for who they are and includes them as a full member of the team. And only when that happens are we going to be able to start to see that kind of growth beyond the typical entry-level position.
I couldn't agree more. That it's the acronym that we chose for this organization that kind of frames that statement for us here at Rosie. So my grandmother's name was Rose, but the I is the initiative that we encourage everybody to bring. And so if you remove the obstacles, both for yourself to get started, then you can kind of be aware of your surroundings. There's a difference between being woke, which unfortunately too many people might be, well, I don't want to go down that road, but being awake is very different. And being able to respond and not always react to your environment and remove the obstacles around you, both when you think about the soft skills and the kind of unwritten curriculum of a workplace where the observational learning takes place. That I don't want to say I love eating humble pie, but around here it doesn't taste so bad, because the idea of it coming from every angle and being done in a respectful way, we include it in our feedback, we include it in every which way. And I think the idea of removing obstacles and then supporting the initiative, right? So if somebody's willing to do the work, we are going to get the right supports around that person if they're able to identify it. And if they're not, let's make sure that they've got the support they need to get to that place where they can identify that, to be able to frame their own story. And so where those that are more familiar in the disability community and have been fighting the fight and been going through programs, and because there's this disconnect, right, of from the service side and the business community, what we've got to find is a common ground and some key terms that work. So we broke down our training in ways of SSI, right? Because story, skills, initiative. What's your story? Where you been? Where are you trying to go? Where are you at now? Like, really, that's what it's at, because that's everybody from Jeremy. Like, it's so beautiful that your family said, hey, this is where we've been, this is where we're at now, and we're still going. Like, this is so beautiful. That's such a beautiful story that a lot of businesses should be recognizing as well. The incredible opportunities around marketing in the right ways, telling the authentic stories of people's journeys and learning, and being able to be using different budget lines for different things that a lot of companies are not thinking about. Because, hey, if I hire a design team, like one maybe through Rosie's, who knows, we're pretty good. But if we were to hire someone was to hire one of our crews to do a design project, that collab generates a lot of different perspectives that maybe weren't thought about before, and also some different business opportunities, right? So it's really trying to think of different ways around that. And to just close it around for the ES, the Rosies, I wish I had one of those bouncing balls right here. It helps me frame the really, but the idea of encouraging solutions that are made by solutionaries, right? They were revolutionaries who had to fight to keep us going. And I guess I'd love to repeat the SSI. It's a story, skills, and initiative. And hopefully we'll be able to have more people joining us online coming up soon for sessions. But this is not a Rosie's commercial. But thank you, Jeremy, for thinking it's a good idea to say that. So, but really the idea of creating this creative community, bringing all of our different perspectives together and encouraging solutionaries, not revolutionaries who are just going to start fights. This is a great discussion about our future together, not a, hey, I think this and somebody else thinks this, but this is how can we all be coming together as solutionaries to do that. So I hope that hits it all there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And SSI, I'm going to write that down as well, and I'm going to remember that. And it was wonderful from both of you to hear about the structures and what you put in place in each of your workplaces. And I'm wondering, when you think about your work, whether this is work that you've been involved in personally, or even just work you've seen in the communities that you're working in, is there a program or a model that comes to mind that was really successful in its inclusivity, or one that you just think of, yes, this is something that people should know about?
You want me to go?
Please go for it. Yeah, I'm filtering. So please, yeah, this is great.
Okay, well, so I made reference to this a minute ago. The really revolutionary idea that was brought to us as part of 21 Enable was this concept of what we now call the inclusion liaison. Ultimately, 21 Enable is about how do we help high schoolers who are about to enter into the workforce, how do we help them transition and learn how to sort of manage through sort of the workforce life prior to leaving school. But that was not really what we were picking up on as a business. What we were picking up on was this concept of a central liaison between the company and the disability services community. There is, as far as I'm concerned, a huge gap in the way the disability services community operates and the way companies like Giant Eagle operates. And frankly, I don't really understand how the community operates, and I'm not so sure people, I imagine it's really hard to understand how Giant Eagle operates when you're looking at it from the outside. And so this whole idea about this liaison is we embed a professional job coach into the company, learns our culture, learns all of the processes and systems, and has access to all of our recruiting information, et cetera, and then goes out into the community and is much better equipped to work with provider agencies, be able to evaluate the skills and abilities of the candidates that are coming to us, all with two key ideas in mind. The first one is make better job placements, because they already understand the skills that are necessary for certain roles and therefore find the right candidates for it. And then also working with our team leaders and our store leaders so that they can build their own skills as it relates to how to be more inclusive in their leadership styles. We have had liaisons across our markets, and they have been wildly successful. Ultimately, the best way to show the success is that the retention rate of the people who are placed through the liaisons is equal to or better than our general team member retention rate. And so it's something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I've been trying to encourage other companies to do it. As far as I'm concerned, it's the future.
Could not agree with you again more. See, we're all solution. This is a solutionary session today.
Lee, at some point you're going to disagree with me.
You know, it's we haven't gotten to. We're just getting to the meat of this.
Okay, good. Okay.
Right. Well, to your point, it's interesting because we kind of serve as that partner in that role to try to bridge some of those gaps. And part of our model is doing that. I love celebrating wonderful companies like the Hyatt Corporation that's doing some amazing stuff. We met with somebody here who's really just welcomed us with open arms at the Shea Hotel here in Culver City. And thank you, Ryan, and everybody there. They just, somebody in our community who used to get in a lot of trouble for painting on the outside of buildings. He just got paid to paint on the outside of a corporate hotel. So that's pretty cool. Kind of the way we see it. And so it's projects like that that also say, hey, anybody that you are willing to work with that is going to make the time to come meet the people, right? Like our model is that for an apprenticeship, when somebody's doing that through us, we also want to make sure that they're learning here, but we're going into those partners with them, similar to what you were explaining, Jeremy, is going in and saying, all right, getting them all prepped, having their accessibility strategies is part of what it is. And it's almost like a consultancy that we've put together to be able to go in and say, okay, how can we make what you do more accessible, and use the power of universal design together to say, okay, here's this experience, here's that experience. And it all started because somebody on our crew who is not afraid of anything. I wish I could see the world like Cody does, but he's like, yo, I have an idea. You have to share this. And I said, great. He said, I want to make a video that's a new training video that tells people how best practices of how to take care of somebody with my physical needs, but I want to do it with a little humor. And I want to do it in a fancy hotel with somebody getting me ready for the Oscars, because he's an aspiring creative. Now, here's an interesting pitch to go to a hotel and say, we'd love to do this project. Can you please help us out? Is different than making that business case of, wouldn't it be awesome to have a really wonderful commercial for how accessible your presidential suite is? If we could tell this really awesome story. And by the way, while we're there, we'll shoot some other stuff with you. Now, it's just framing the experience in a different way. I think there are wonderful organizations that are doing a great job getting the technical skills out there for people. Like we're seeing Exceptional Minds that's really focused on one of the communities out here. But again, it's around the technical skills. I love what Respectability is doing and being involved, from getting to share through social media. If anybody hasn't read Tyranne's story that Respectability put out there, thank you. She's a colleague of mine here at Rosie's, and she's somebody who shared with us a while ago, I want to be a filmmaker. And because this community and network of everybody working with her to remove those obstacles for herself through that Warner Media Access Group, like the fellowship, all of those wonderful things, it's that community that's not necessarily built around that person, but that each individual is able to build from within, and by giving to others along the way too. That's something that I feel gets lost a lot in terms of, it's not always a give if it just is, and you just really think about access in that way.
Excellent. Thank you. I love the examples that you both give. They feel really real world, and it's vivid the way you speak, Lee, and I'm picturing it in my mind as we go. We have a couple minutes left in our discussion piece here, and I want to keep this going. I have full faith in the fact that we're going to have the most robust Q&A ever. But just to close out the discussion, right? We see this happening. To close out the discussion piece here, I was curious if each of you could say, if you had one single piece of advice for other organizations or businesses on how they could become more inclusive, what would that one piece of advice be from each of you as we're heading into the next section of this and that Q&A, where I think we're going to get some really great questions.
Ooh.
Well, I think this goes back to why we say differently abled and not disability. If you ask me what is the first big hurdle that any organization must get over if they're going to be successful with differently abled inclusion, is that they have to get over their own fear, which is another way of saying you have to break through the bias. Because in my mind, the word disability, frankly, it has bias built into it. It just says there's something that I can't do. Mm-hmm. This is exactly why we switched to differently abled, because we recognize the first sort of philosophy that you have to believe in is that you focus on what people can do and not what they can't. And the moment that happens is when you start to unlock the ability to figure out the right way to help people into the organization. And if you focus on what people can't do, then it never really works. And so that's my advice, is just to focus on getting rid of the bias.
literally and figuratively for us, right person, right seat of the bus. And if everybody has this, if everybody on a team, or here we call everybody a crew, but if everybody has the ability or at least awareness of each role that's needed and a respect for the job that their colleagues have to do in the moment and strategically, if you have the right person, the right seat of the bus, you can kind of get anywhere you're trying to go. And so I would say that that's probably, I feel bad because I said that once, and then someone we did a consulting project for, when I went back, the COO was no longer there. And I was like, oh, what happened to that person? They were like, remember when they wouldn't sit in the session with somebody on the education team? And I said, yeah. They said, because we were able to actually see how this culture really needed to change in a different way and where things were coming from. And so I think until, like Jeremy, to your point of not being afraid to have those tough conversations, as soon as people have what we like to say significant communication tools, because everyone has one, it's a sign if you can do something, a sign if you can't. We break down the word, right? And so that's a really important thing. And I'd say just, yes, giving people access to their ability to advocate within the environment as well. And it's okay for things not to be okay all the time. I'd say that's it's better when they are, but it's okay for them not to be.
Couldn't agree more. And that was actually a very perfect segue. We're going to head into the Q&A portion of tonight's panel. And so if anyone has any questions they'd like to submit for Jeremy and Lee, please use the question and answer, the Q&A box that you can see in the middle of your screen. And while those of you who are part of our audience tonight are thinking through any questions that you have, I think we can kick things off by saying, Lee, something you just touched on right there. You talked about advocacy in the workplace and employees being able to advocate for themselves. What is the best way for someone to be able to do that? How do they start that process? How do they approach it? I'd love to hear from both of you if you have thoughts on this.
Lee.
Ooh, I apologize. I was reading the question, and because I was so intrigued, can you please reframe your question? And thank you, whoever just asked that question. Powerful, and I'm excited to jump in there. Anyway, sorry. Can you please reframe the question? I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
And
this was actually a question. This was actually a question I had posed. And so we have a question in the chat too, which I'll get to next. But I was curious, when we're talking about kind of that advocating for oneself, how do employees start that process to advocate for themselves within their workplace? And then we'll jump to the question in the Q&A box.
Respectfully. If you do it, if you start with giving respect. Now, if you're not getting that respect, to start with, the idea I would say is having the awareness to respond and not react to the situation would be really important. But respect it's everything, because it shows that you respect yourself. It shows that you are trying to be a professional, even though you might have something that's challenging you personally. You're able to put on that professional hat. And really, I'd say in a professional setting, it's that. Otherwise, we could, step outside. We'll deal with this. But no, I'm half kidding. But really, I think advocating for yourself has to be something that is uncomfortable, and that's okay. I think that for you, because if you're really going outside that comfort zone, you're going to be a little more comfortable the next time, and you'll continue to grow. And I'd say just take a healthy risk. It's probably the best way to frame that whole thing, to take that healthy risk.
And find out who your supports are, right?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
That would be the solution for the first step, but yes, thank you.
Jeremy, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that this was going to be a question, and I have to admit to you, it's a tough one for me, because I don't think of our culture as one in which where it would be difficult to advocate for oneself. And so, to me, the sort of the system of our culture supports what people need. Now, is that true every single day, all of the time for everybody? Maybe, maybe not. But I would like to believe that Giant Eagle is the kind of place where people, like I said, can feel like they can be themselves and have the support network that is necessary to help them be successful. And so, I think the best way to answer that question is just to speak up and say, here's what I need to be successful. And then, the reason why we're good at this is because our team leaders and our story leaders listen, right? If we didn't listen, if we didn't have a track record of that, this would have failed a long time ago. That's sort of why it's just so sort of natural to us, I think, which is why I'm having trouble sort of thinking about why that might be difficult.
No, I love what you said though. Speak up. That's exactly the first step, and something that a lot of people might benefit from hearing because they feel afraid to speak up or they feel like they don't have the support in doing it. One of the things I was going to talk about a little bit tonight were some local resources. I want to keep it focused on the Q&A, but for those of you who are joining us tonight through the audience, know that we'll be sending out some additional local resources for individuals that they can take advantage of and go to for help as they're advocating for themselves and finding that workplace setting that's going to be a good fit for them. So a few questions we have from our audience tonight. Are Giant Eagle and Rosie's committed to hiring and supporting people with psychiatric disabilities? And if so, how do you convey that commitment to potential or current employees?
So the answer is, of course, but I just don't think about it that way. I think Lee mentioned this a few minutes ago. The fact is that if someone can do the job, we hire them. And I don't make any judgments or there are no rules about who we are committed to hiring and who we're not committed to hiring. And so if someone can be a good team member, come in every day, do a good job, serve our customers in the right way, then we love them.
Couple answers to that one. People are people, not diagnoses. People, as somebody who does not see a lot of concepts like time as linear and boxes can be scary, it's really important to recognize that not everybody sees or experiences the world in the same way. And the concept for us and the way we try to convey that is our commitment to, and it's actually, we had a recent change, and I apologize for not sharing. There was a recent change to our mission statement that we actually made a tweak for this very reason, because being very intentional with our language, but the idea of creating opportunities for people to engage and work with diverse abilities. That being said, that our commitment to being open and positive and respectful and supportive of those colleagues who may have a disability. I understand that word is not something that I wish I didn't have to think about it, and I really wish we didn't have to use it anymore outside of like grant applications, because that seems to be some of those places where a lot of the more traditional places where resources come from, they prefer more traditional methods sometimes. And so when Jeremy, that's why I was so excited when you talked about putting the value on qualitative outcomes. We're about to start a really exciting study with Vanderbilt University and looking for more partners to join us, which is really great, with someone who actually got his PhD when we first started working with us, with the crew. And he's now there as a researcher and getting to see where people were, where they're at now, right? Story, skills, initiative, like now where are we all going together? And I would say that if we weren't open to hiring people who would fall into some of those categories, we wouldn't have all those great ideas and incredibly committed and talented workforce that we've been able to put in place in different settings. I'd say both for both of us. So
thank you for sharing, both of you. Coming from our chat here, one of our attendees tonight mentioned that as a parent of a differently abled person, it's encouraging to see that private industry is willing to look beyond the disability. So thank you to both of you, your communities, your organizations for that. But the same person said, OVR told our son he was not eligible for competitive employment, but he's been employed. And so as we're thinking about where someone who's differently abled is going within their community for other employment, it gets me thinking, where would you send people? Where do you send people if not through your own organization? I don't know if you have a favorite place locally here, Jeremy, if you could speak to that, or even, who's doing this good, inclusive work in Pittsburgh around our community, or even nationally, that could be a resource for someone who's looking for resources.
So I don't know if I totally understand the question. I'm going to possibly answer a different question. The companies that I admire most in Pittsburgh, as it relates to differently abled inclusion are, and I'm sure I'm going to offend someone who might be listening from a different company, and I apologize for that. But I admire PNC, UPMC, and Highmark the most. There are many other companies doing great work. They just happen to be the companies that I know the most about. And so that's where I would start. But it is, so Becky, am I answering?
No, that's exactly right. And I'm thinking, what is it most that you admire about them? You say you admire them the most. Are you able to elaborate a little bit especially for the local attendees in tonight's discussion? Why? What is the why for why you picked those three companies?
Because it's authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And they are weaving inclusion throughout the entire system and culture. I see it from top to bottom. And so does that mean that someone is automatically going to find the right job at one of those companies? No, not necessarily. But if I were differently abled and looking for a job, I would, of course, start at companies that at least authentically say that they're committed to making this a success.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say start with a person-centered approach.
Mm-hmm.
Think as an individual, if you're the one that's going to be doing the job, think about how you want to spend your time, right? And when you're looking, and that's a first step, I'd say, and then really going to look at those companies that you identify with their values, like Jeremy's saying, like because own the process, because the more confidence that you've got coming into it, I feel like that the more likely you are to have a better interview, the more likely you are to get hired. And I would just love to celebrate the comment that Ellen shared, because one of the main reasons I named this organization Rosie's is because a guidance counselor in high school told me I should think about finding a vocational training program. And my grandmother made me take her in person to hand deliver the graduation from my MBA program to that guidance counselor. And it's those who are with us along the journey, alongside, not doing it for us, so that we don't get stuck, but those that are encouraging the journey that can really help. I think I know that there's incredible resources through the Respectability a website and through the community of partners and creative community that's come through there. Great things like the 1 in 4 coalition that's out there to start thinking about, okay, how can we take things for those that are interested in entertainment, and places that feel right, places you want to work. If that's not a company that is open to working with you, then they don't deserve your talent. I'd take it like that. So.
I think we have time for one more comment/question. So I'm going to share a comment that came from one of our listeners tonight. And they said, I believe it takes a leader willing to embrace differences and support them as much as possible. It also takes a leader who's willing to be sensitive to the needs that may be different than what they're used to in their lives. And so a question that I'm pulling from that comment is, in both of your work places, either now or where you've been in the past, what kind of training has been dedicated to leadership and existing employees to engage with the differently abled community?
The best way to answer that question is that we actually don't do a lot of training. The work that it took to help our leaders be successful was exactly what I spoke about at the beginning. It was, I am essentially standing on the shoulders of the people who did the really hard work 40 years ago when they started getting over their own fear. Once the culture started to sort of take hold, what we found is that training is not necessary if you have people with heart. And that is essentially what that person was describing. Giant Eagle prides itself on having really good people who work here. And so as long as the person wants to see other people succeed, and like whoever it was that made the comment is open to the idea of looking at differences as a benefit and not as a detractor, then the world is our oyster. And I don't necessarily think that training, specific training is necessary. Now, that doesn't mean that learning isn't necessary. And of course, people need to build their skills. One person who's differently abled is different from the next, and every single person needs different kinds of things to be successful. So certainly one size doesn't fit all, but ultimately it just takes people with heart.
Couldn't agree more. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Lee, there?
I mean, you pretty much nailed it there, Jeremy. I think that's pretty on point. Again, the one last thing I would just celebrate is the way you frame something at the beginning of what we're doing well and what our opportunities are. And I think that it's places that I have worked in the past that are framed as such. Those are great places. It's a culture that we try to create here as well, and really thinking about continuing education, because that's something that everybody needs, and there's always a skill that maybe our team could be learning with somebody else. So think about like accessible continuing education. There's a theme here. It's really great. Keep it going.
Couldn't agree more. There's always space to be learning new things. I'm going to close it out by saying we have a final question in the chat, how organizations can advocate for more diverse and inclusive hiring practice on a meso and macro level. I wondered if Lee and Jeremy, if you had any thoughts, if you wouldn't mind throwing those in the chat box or in that Q&A box. And I am going to move us on to the next piece of tonight's closeout. And so thank you both for a wonderful discussion. And thank you all audience members for participating in this. I'm going to turn it over to Judy Greenwald Cohen, who is a board member of Jewish Residential Services and Aging and Human Needs Commission member of the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh. Judy?
Thank you, Becky. And oh my gosh, thank you so much to Jeremy and Lee for an amazing discussion. I also, of course, need to thank the planning committee that's made up of staff and volunteers at several organizations that are invested in inclusion, to Jewish Residential Services and the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh for hosting this event, and also to the many community partner organizations who promoted this evening. Lee, you started us off by talking about why this is important, and you said something that really resonated with me. You said, because creating a culture of access and respect for everyone so that all can thrive is important. But what struck me between both Jeremy and Lee is everything you were talking about, creating this incredible culture of inclusion in your organizations and helping others to do so, makes for a good workplace for everyone. I want to work in places like this, where the person-centered approach and where people are thinking about what is best for the individual. How are they going to be part of our team? How are they going to be their authentic self in their work? That's what all of us want when we go and work, whether it's in nonprofits or culture of corporate America. So thank you for that and for making us all think about what that means. Some of the themes also that struck me are that workplaces are stronger when people with disabilities are employed. And by the way, hiring people with disabilities, as was pointed out, is good practice. They have better retention. They create an atmosphere that is more positive. And as Jeremy pointed out several times, in his business, customers really appreciate and admire and support that they're doing that. Some other notes that one of my helpers, thank you to Lily Wine, also took some notes for me, is once you help people get in the door and they're hired, it's important to help them develop further skills and opportunities for growth into management positions. How important is that? Again, for anyone, they're looking at the individual. What are their strengths? What are their skills? How do they move up through the organizations? And Jeremy said, we want to promote them to management. So that's really excellent. When people feel that they're proud of themselves and can leverage their abilities, they feel appreciated, they feel included as a member of the team. We talked about that with growth from an entry-level position. They do need some supports. And I think what also was important is what can companies do to ensure people with disabilities do succeed. Jeremy talked about his inclusion liaison that goes out in the community and works with the agencies that help people with disabilities find employment. And where you might not be able to do that as an employer, you can think about that intentionality of how you can make that work. And I would also encourage people that even if you're not in a leadership or an HR role at your companies, you should and can promote and advocate for inclusive and accessible practices at your organizations and businesses. A couple other just high-level notes to people who are seeking employment: speak up about your needs, but be respectful, as Lee mentioned. This resonated again with me so much. People are people, they're not their diagnoses. If someone's committed to the job, give them a chance, hire them. And then again, for those looking for employment, Jeremy mentioned 3 companies that he felt are very authentic, in addition to Giant Eagle, as we've heard this evening. Reach out to them, and you will learn about some resources in the community in a separate email about ways that you can find employment if you're a person with a disability seeking employment. And I think Lily's going to post some more information in chat from Respectability on that. So it's time to end this wonderful evening. Again, thank you to our presenters and to Becky for her great facilitation. And thank to all of you for attending. We hope that tonight's conversation brought you some new ideas around inclusivity in the workplace and on our community. And just know that the leadership that put this program together are really committed to moving the needle on inclusion. Thank you all for joining us this evening.